Crick. We're going to go with that, I guess.
And Wally Lukaczynski.
Enjoy the fake-tainted national title, you scumbags.
Covering everything from the green and gold to pro, college, and high school sports around South Central Wisconsin. Broadcasting live from the Daily Dodge TV studios. This is the Damn Sports Show on Daily Dodge TV and 1430 ESPN Beaver Dam.
Well, that sucked. 22-10 loss to the Eagles in the wild card round. Really no other way to put it. The Packers bow out in the first round of the playoffs. They lose at one point what looked to be 5 of their starting 11 on offense over the course of a couple of quarters. And they fall to the number 2 seed in a defense full of all pros. They look like that young team we've talked about all year, the second youngest team to ever grace the postseason in this expanded bracket as well. And now we've got offseason talk for a little over 7.5 months. Drafts coming up. Free agency's coming up. Goody's got moves that obviously a lot of fans would like to see him make. We're going to have a new topic every single day about, how this team can improve going into 2025-26. But today is kind of just reflection on yesterday, on the short playoff run, on the 11-6 season, on the stacked NFC North. A lot to unpack here. We'll talk about what frustrated us the most about yesterday. You can call into the show at any time today at 920-887-9595 to tell us what frustrated you the most about yesterday's game. We have our top 3 prep plays of the week for Beaver Dam boys basketball, Beaver Dam girls hockey, and Beaver Dam boys hockey. And we wrap up today's show with who's hot, who's not. This is the Damn Sports Show on 1430 ESPN Beaver Dam and Daily Dodge TV. You can follow us on Facebook at ESPN Beaver Dam, Twitter at ESPN BD, the show Twitter for daily polls and videos from these very episodes is Damn Sports ESPN. And again, another reminder, you can call into the show at any time at 920-887-9595. If there was ever a time where I think Packers fandom wants to vent, it would be today, next 48 hours, really, in response to what happened yesterday. That was a lot of talking for me. I'm Corey Sparks, Wally Lukaczynski here with me, and we'll be welcoming Gabe Neitzel on in just a couple of moments. That sucked. I'll say the first 2 words I said to start the episode. That was not optimal.
No, and I got to eat a lot of crow, too, because I was so excited to see how the defense played yesterday, but to get that kind of performance out of the special teams and the offense was not what I was counting on. It was not what I was hoping for, and unfortunately now I have to come and face the music because I was very wrong about everything that happened yesterday.
Well, in your defense, you couldn't have really forecasted a couple of offensive linemen going down, Josh Jacobs going down when it felt like this team had any inkling of momentum. He was bruised up. Jordan Love was shaking his hand off again. The top 3 receivers on this team being out at one point, Watson going into the game, then Reed, then Dobbs. It was a catastrophe.
No, there was, and there are excuses out there. There were a lot of injuries. There were a lot of penalties. There were opening kickoff. You could argue whether or not that should have been reversed. It should have been Packers ball.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you left that game, you knew that the better team won. And I still feel like there was a sizable gap, even with everything that the Eagles did wrong yesterday.
They didn't play well.
They played poorly. And
right.
the fact that the Packers weren't able to really ever make it feel like that game was in doubt is a testament to, I think, how far this team still has to grow.
Mm-hmm. I think you and I are relatively disappointed, along with many others. I do want to welcome Gabe Neitzel onto the show. A reminder, you can hear him live on Jen, Gabe and Chewy, weekdays from 7 to 9 a.m. on ESPN Milwaukee, both terrestrial radio and, of course, the YouTube channel as well. Gabe, hope everything's going well. Hope you had a good weekend. I kind of just want to open up the conversation here by asking you something I'll ask our audience throughout today's episode. Was there one thing that frustrated you the most about last night's 22-10 loss to the Eagles?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you guys hit on a lot of different things of how poorly they played, but at the end of the day, they just weren't good enough. And I think it's hard to kind of take it back and take a step back and be like, okay, did this team grow? Did they get better from a year ago? And I think we're going to have to be a little bit removed to get the emotion out of it to truly answer that question, because Jordan Love was asked that question last night when he was at the podium after the game. And, especially when you think about it, they won their last 3 games in a row last year, and that arrow was pointing up. Then they win the playoff game, play so well. So it seems like that arrow is pointed up, and it's almost the exact opposite this year. Even though they win 2 more games than they did a season ago during the regular season, they lose their last 2, including one to the Bears, and then, get again, I mean, I guess you only lose by 12, so it's not blown out, but it just felt like it was such a bigger deficit than that when you go into Philadelphia. So at the end of the day, this team just was not good enough this year.
Gabe, a quote I saw come out a couple of hours ago, Keyshawn Nixon said he doesn't want to be on the special teams unit going forward, doesn't think it's a great idea, would rather be one of those primary members of the secondary, and that's it. From your perspective, is that a teammate who doesn't like the full role that he has right now, or is it more a form of self-realization that, hey, based on how I performed yesterday, I probably shouldn't be out there for those plays?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, he was a two-time first-team All-Pro kick returner, and the rules changed a little bit this year, and he didn't have quite the same success that he had the two previous seasons. But I think that's just him, possibly sharing some frustration, but also sharing goals. Because I mean, if you have a number one corner, they're not back there returning kicks, they're not back there returning punts. Mm-hmm. And if that's his ultimate goal is to be, especially with some of the growth he showed as a cover guy this year, we thought he'd just be a slot guy, really transitioned well to the outside in one of those boundary quarters and played well at times this year. I think that's just him saying, hey, if I want to be quarterback one, I've got to leave the kick return stuff behind.
Gabe, you're the man, first of all. Nice talking to you on a very somber Monday. But we spoke to you about the draft briefly a few weeks ago, and you were telling us that you expect the Packers to go defense in round one. Two-part question, I guess, for you. Do you still expect that to be the case? And if so, how do you think the Packers will try to address the wide receiver room, if at all?
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to have to address the wide receiver room. And I guess it all depends upon how that draft board kind of shakes out. I still expect them to go defense there in the first round. And it appears that there are, in just some brief research, Wally, that this seems to be a pretty decent top part of the wide receiver class for this upcoming year. The problem is the quarterback class is not very good. We've got the two quarterbacks and that's it. So are all five of those guys going to be gone by the time the Packers pick? Because you're not going to have quarterbacks that are going to be going the way that they did with 6 going in the top 15 this past season. Right now it looks like there's only going to be 2. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if any of those guys are going to last. And if you bring somebody in as a rookie, would they be your number one right away? It's something that Goody's going to have to address because when you just take a look at that wide receiver room at the beginning of the season, we don't need a number one wide receiver. We've got 4 guys, and it could be any one of them any given week. And I don't know about you guys. I feel the only one who really grew this year was Christian Watson.
Yeah.
He was able to make some catches that he had struggled with in the past, and then, of course, has the ACL injury. And the problem now with that is he tears it in Week 18. Who knows if there's additional structural damage inside that they're not going to know about until they open the knee up to go repair that ACL. So, best case scenario, he's back 10, 11, 12 weeks into the season next year, and he's also going to be going into a free agent year. So who knows what happens there? They need to address that position. They need to have a number one wide receiver. This is something that I've felt very strongly about going back to the middle part of this season when it was kind of obvious that nobody was really stepping up and developing and showing that they could be that guy. When you look at all the teams that are remaining, and that includes still the 2 teams that have to play their wild card game tonight, all but the Buffalo Bills have a go-to receiver. Have a guy that when they know it's 3rd and 5, this is the guy we want to go to. Hey, we're going to scheme X amount of touches for this guy in this game because we know we have to get the ball to him if we want to have success. Every last team has a wide receiver like that except for the Buffalo Bills. So I think that just kind of shows that's the next step the Packers are going to have to take. They took the risk of, hey, let's see if one of these 4 guys develops. None of them really did. Now that's something Gutekunst has to address this offseason.
And whether that's through the draft, Gabe, or through just signing somebody who's currently in the NFL already, I do want to do a little exercise with you. I think we did this with players in general before, but let's go down the line on these receivers and who you believe after this season sees a second contract. Some of these guys have a little more time than the others. Romeo Doubs, do you think he sees a second contract on this team?
I do not.
Okay. What about Jaden?
And the reason why I say with Romeo Doubs, because I was curious and I looked at this, MVS didn't get a second contract with the Green Bay Packers, right?
Right.
Through 3 seasons, MVS more yards than Romeo Doubs in his first 3 seasons.
Wow.
Would not have guessed that.
Huh. That is interesting.
Yeah, it's wild what perception can do, right? Because MVS was, he had some good moments, certainly, but he had Devontae Adams as that number 1 receiver. But, yeah, granted, it's very close. I believe it's like 1,723 yards to 1,700.
Okay.
But it's close. But again, MVS wasn't looked upon highly, and Romeo Dobbs, while there's certainly some good things about him, I don't know if he's really earned that second contract.
Gabe, what about the guy who was used as a Swiss Army knife first half of the year, really shot out of a cannon, and then we were looking for him the last couple of months? Do you think Jaden Reed sees a second contract with this team?
As of right now, no.
Okay.
Because of the regression in the second half. Now, look, maybe he bounces back, and he's in a little bit of a different spot than Romeo because he's got 2 years left on his rookie deal, so he can certainly grow. He was the team's leading receiver this year. But they're going to have to see more of that. They're going to have to see more of that growth from Jaden Reed if he wants to earn a second contract.
And then we could go down the line, go into the Malik Heaths of the world, on Tavion Wicks. We'll just close with this one, and it's the receiver that you said you felt like, and I would agree with you, made more progress from week 1 to week 18 than anybody else. Christian Watson, do you think he lives to see another contract with Green Bay?
I'm really curious if they can try to offer him something because, some of these guys are going to have to stick around. Look, and I don't know if we're going to be able to offer him a kind of low-ball contract and with him coming off of his injury, or if they're going to want to wait and see what he looks like coming off that injury, especially with some of the bad luck they've had with guys and knees, whether we're talking about Jair Alexander, who had some not good things to say in the locker room today. Well, I guess he really didn't have anything to say because apparently he said he didn't have anything nice to say.
Fair enough.
So, Jair's knee, certainly Bakhtiari's knee, I would think that Gutekunst would probably want to see what Christian Watson looks like coming off the knee surgery before offering any sort of second contract. So I would fully expect that Watson, is going to be a free agent. Maybe they bring him back after that, but I think he's going to, have the ability to test free agency after next year.
Fair enough.
We know that there's no moral victories in the NFL, especially when you get to the postseason. But with as miserable as the Packers' offense and special teams were yesterday, the defense did hold its own and kept them in that game. Do you think that this defense is a strong pass rusher or a solid cornerback away from being closer to that top end of one of the better defenses in all of football?
Yeah, look, I don't know the last time we felt this good about a Packers linebacking core and safety position, right? We've been searching for those things since 2010. The last time they won a Super Bowl. And I think not just Xavier McKinney either. I thought Evan Williams played really well at times yesterday. We've seen Javon Bullard step up throughout the course of the season. And so you feel good about that position. I'm curious to see if they pick up the fifth-year option on Quay Walker because, he was starting to show some good signs before he had his tough ankle injury. He was, non-factor yesterday, but coming off an ankle injury, especially at that position, can be tough. But Edgerrin Cooper, a lot of people excited about him and the star potential that he has. So it's about, shoring up that pass defense now. Can you find a pass rusher? I'm not quite sure where, because when you're drafting in the 20s, you're kind of looking at a draft and develop type of pass rusher, the ones that haven't necessarily worked out for the Packers. So do you go cornerback in that position? That's one of the questions that Brian Gutekunst is going to have to answer.
I think I asked you something similar earlier, just a couple of weeks ago, Gabe, but is this team heading in the right direction? I know you mentioned there are different barometers we can use, regular season record, how do they do in the postseason, were they hot at the right time? This year they weren't, but they did have a better record in the regular season than last year. It just felt like certain issues, like the ones we're talking about right now, the lack of a wide receiver one, the pass rushing in general, having a primary threat in that department. It felt like they were more amplified this year. Do you think this team got better than the team that was there last year?
Yeah, I think they're going in the right direction. This team is a better team than they were a year ago. They also played a better team in, the Philadelphia Eagles. I think that Eagles team is better than the Cowboys team the Packers went down to Dallas to face a year ago. And the problem right now, as I see it with the Packers, is they have a lot of good players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of these guys that Goody has drafted that have turned out to be Bs, solid B players. They don't have enough A players. And if you want to have that ultimate success, that high-end success, you got to have A players. You think about the last team that won a Super Bowl for the Packers. It had Greg Jennings. It had, Donald Driver was a little more toward the back end, but he had a lot of success, and he had been a star in this league. Aaron Rodgers was ascending. Clay Matthews, in his second year in the league, was an All-Pro. Charles Woodson was a year removed from being the Defensive Player of the Year. Nick Collins was an incredibly talented player. So they had the star power, and Jordy Nelson was starting to come into his own, and it might have been the MVP of the Super Bowl had he not dropped 3 passes in that game. They had a lot of star power on that team. Mm-hmm. And that when you look up and down this Packers roster, I mean, I know Rashawn Gary somehow ended up being a Pro Bowler, but really outside of Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, I don't think you can say there are really any other stars other than that. Every other roster, again, maybe except for the Buffalo Bills, but I think that when you look at these teams that are going to be standing at the end, there's a lot of star power, and that's either to address that, guys are going to have to grow, including Jordan Love. And Jordan Love has to be better, and he took a little. I don't know if he took a step back this year with the injuries, if that's a learning thing where he can kind of learn to deal with some of the injuries he had to play with this year, but he has to be better next year. If this team wants to avoid being the 7th seed, he has to be better, and I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. And then you have to have some other guys step up and be studs around him.
Well, in talking about Jordan Love, I'm actually happy the way you were talking about that A players versus B players. Jordan Love is a good quarterback, but he didn't play well yesterday. He had 3 picks. We know it's a different world come January. Where is your level of confidence at that Jordan Love can be that elite tier quarterback, that A player that you're talking about that can help elevate a team around him?
I think my confidence is still relatively high in Jordan Love, and he can make all the throws. The problem with him is from time to time he makes one of those really good back foot throws, and then he starts making more back foot throws, another back foot throw. It kind of reminds me a little bit, as I kind of sat around and thought about it today. Early in Matthew Stafford's career, and this probably even lingered a little bit more to the middle part of his career when he was with the Detroit Lions, one of the things Stafford loved to do, throw sidearm. Loved to drop down the arm slot, show that he could throw sidearm, and every once in a while he would do it for no reason, and the ball would sail on him. It would lead to a lot of turnovers. Now, obviously, he cleaned that up and continued to get better as his career went on. So there's just little things like that Jordan Love really needs to clean up in order to kind of take that next step and show that consistency, because he can make all the throws. You can go look at any Jordan Love highlight tape, and he's got all the tools. And if you watched Get Up this morning, Rex Ryan, who said, he's got all the elite tools, he's just not an elite player. And when you have those tools, it's just a matter of being able to harness them and use them, be a little bit more consistent. Now, I would also argue, I think that he would be a lot better if there was somebody who could consistently get open and he knew he could rely upon.
Absolutely.
And that's where, again, football, why we all love it partially, is because it is that ultimate team sport and all these pieces have to fit together. So I am curious to know what Jordan Love would look like if he had a bona fide number 1 receiver.
Yeah, I'm curious, and as we talk to you more and more throughout the offseason and get closer to the draft, which is in Green Bay, which will be awesome in April, Gabe, our names like T. Higgins or high-end wide receiver ones out of the draft, albeit the Packers are going to pick 23rd or 24th, are those the guys who might just be the missing piece to the puzzle on this offense? Gabe, as always, we appreciate the time, and we'll talk next week.
All right, sounds good, boys.
All right, appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Gabe.
Again, is Gabe Neitzel, a straight shooter from Jen, Gabe, and Chewy. You can listen to him or watch him on ESPN Milwaukee, terrestrial radio, or the YouTube channel, weekdays from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. It'll be Gabe Neitzel, Jen Latta, and Mark Chmura breaking it down. Mark Chmura, a former Packer player. We've talked so many times about Wilde and Tausch and how Mark Tauscher will give you that player's perspective. Mark Chmura does the same thing. He was in that same locker room. Those guys overlapped for a bit, and in general, you're going to get some grade A perspective out of all those guys.
Yeah, and I love I feel like I needed a little bit of a dose of cold water because I had been so optimistic going into the postseason. Mm-hmm. I know that we weren't exactly like saying this is the year that they're going to come out of the NFC, but it felt like if they were able to do something yesterday, and it felt like the scene was set, the way the Eagles offense played, that there was room for the Packers to get it done. It's just, if anything, it's a good time to reset your expectations going forward, figure out what this team does need to improve on, because it feels like they're that close. They feel like they're a couple players away from being a team that's playing in the 3rd, 4th weekend of January. Instead, we are sad, and it's a somber Monday.
I think that's the frustrating part, and we'll get to what frustrated us the most as well. Also, I'm just looking. I apologize. Mark Chmura and Mark Tauscher missed each other by a year.
Well, it was still the same locker room.
Either way, both of them interacted with Brett Favre. We'll just go there. Yeah, same locker room. I think that's the tough part, is you look at all the different games against contenders, and this honestly might have been the one you look at and go, yeah, they really weren't in it. And even at halftime, you felt like it was possible to claw back from a 10-0 deficit. But more times than not this year, when this team played a contender, even though they lost to them, you're like, oh my gosh.
No.
It was this one mistake. It was this one possession. If they fine-tuned this one aspect of the game in this matchup, they come out on top. They're close, and they're all still very, very young.
And I know we're going to be talking about frustrations when we come into the second block here shortly, so I won't harp on it, but it wasn't one mistake. It was a litany of mistakes.
In this one it was.
And that's what's so frustrating, too, is that there are, dozens, it feels like, of errors that you can point to. And this was a one-possession game in the fourth quarter.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah, that monstrous Josh Jacobs run, I think, instilled a lot of belief in us, gave us a shot in the arm to think maybe it's not over yet, and then the Eagles marched back down the field.
Yep.
Kind of put it away. All right, that's what we'll go over next. You can call into the show over the break or when we come back, 920-887-9595, or go into the live chat on YouTube. That is Daily Dodge TV in the search bar, and hit the live chat option. We want to hear from you. What was the most frustrating part of that Packers loss to the Eagles last night by a score of 22-10 that ultimately ended the season? We'll give our take next. This is the Dam Sports Show on 1430 ESPN Beaver Dam and Daily Dodge TV.